Welcome back to Wednesday is Missing by P.G. Lark. This is episode 5 containing chapters 15 to 17.
Chapter 15. The Return of the Mice. The mice were here, in the lab. She had noticed them, then ignored them because of the wreck. But they were here, all 4 of them, and they weren't doing any of the things mice did. They were near the frame, close to the heat-warped steel, moving in tight, agitated circles, stopping, starting. One of them rose on its hind legs and reached at the casing as if there was something behind it that mattered more than anything a mouse could need. Then it stopped. It put both forepaws against the ruined frame and stayed there, not scratching, not sniffing, just standing in front of the wreck, as if it had found a door it could no longer open. This was where they had been steering her. Megan watched them and made herself think the sentence she had been refusing to think since the mouse on the notice board rail. She could no longer afford her rule against treating mice as evidence. They weren't behaving like mice. They had brought her to the one room in the building that had been sealed and explained away and somehow hidden from more than 40 people, and mice didn't herd a girl towards evidence. Whatever they were, they had a reason to be here. The same one she did. Something had happened in this room, and someone had gone to enormous trouble to make sure no one remembered it. She didn't yet have the last piece. A broken machine couldn't tell her what had happened or whether anyone else had been in the room, and without that the thought stayed a shape and refused to become a name. The day it happened, Wednesday, had been taken out of the building and covered over. The cover-up was good. It had missed exactly 3 things, and she had found all 3. The mistake in the kitchen log. Philip, who remembered Wednesday, 4 mice with nowhere obvious to live, agitated around the wreck, trying to tell her something in the only way they could. "All right," she said, to the mice, to the wreck, and to Dr. Light. "All right, I'm listening now." The nearest mouse stopped its circle and looked at her, and Megan was suddenly certain that it had understood her exactly. She put her notebook away. She had what she'd come for, and more than she'd wanted. She went out the way she'd come, past the blank screens, the scorch mark, and the sign that gave the wrong reason for the locked door. Back into the bright renovated corridors with 2 answers that should have made her feel clever. They didn't. Since Mr. Hong had knocked on their door in California, she had wanted to know what she was. She'd just learned that the machine which could have told her was destroyed, and that she'd been the one to confirm it, and that the boy who did it thought he'd been handed a gift. Her date was still there. Instead of the day she'd find out if she was an element, it was a date on a calendar, pointing at a machine that wasn't there. Chapter 16. The Grey Clue. Megan went back to the library. It was the quietest room in the building, and she needed quiet. She had a data set and no answer, which was a better problem than it sounded. She sat at the same table she always sat at, opened her notebook to the running list and stopped gathering. Gathering was comfortable. Assembling was where you found out whether you'd been clever or only busy. She started, inevitably, by getting it wrong. There was a dictionary open on its stand, as always, and a mouse was sitting on the open page. Megan watched it for a while and built, in the careful way she built everything, a theory. The mouse had chosen the page. The mouse was indicating the page. She leaned in to read which words the universe had selected for her, and found the entry for Thurible, a vessel for burning incense, and below it Thurifer, the person who carries one. She wrote Thurible in her notebook and underlined it twice. Then the obvious occurred to her. The dictionary had been open at that page for weeks, because nobody had touched it. The mouse was sitting there because it was a flat, warm surface in a cold library. A Thurible had precisely nothing to do with anything. She crossed out Thurible 3 times. A scientist, she reminded herself, was someone who let the evidence be boring when it was boring. The mouse was just sitting. Not everything was a message. She had wanted one so badly she'd nearly taken dictation from a rodent's choice of nap location. She didn't copy out the entire list of evidence again. She had read it enough times to have it by heart, which was its own kind of warning. Reading the evidence again was easier than deciding what it meant. So she put the pen down and made herself look at the 3 facts the edit had failed to take. The delivery log, Philip, and the mice. The first 2 she had already taken apart and reassembled. It was the third she'd been refusing on principle, since the first mouse. She looked at the mice as evidence now, as she should have from the first day, 4 of them, in a building that had no holes, which meant they hadn't come in. They had already been here. Mice that followed instead of fleeing that led her somewhere. That had brought her, patiently, to the one sealed room in the building and stood at the wreck with their paws on the warped steel. And she noted mice that had turned up in the same week as a folder she wasn't allowed to read, with a grey official word half under Mr. Hong's hand. Inspection? Inspectorate. And Mr. Hong, on her very first morning, saying he was going to be surprised by inspectors, as though surprise were a thing you could schedule. Then she turned to the back of the notebook and took out the thing she'd kept between the pages all along, the grey sliver of cardboard, NIPO, and the start of an L. She had matched it to the Unipol folder on Mr. Hong's desk the day Philip arrived. UNIPOL, a torn corner of an inspection document, carried into the library by a mouse and dropped on the spot where one of them had reared up at her. She'd known that much for a while. What she had not had then was anywhere to put it. A mouse that had been holding or wearing or recently been the sort of thing that handled Unipol paper. It had needed the rest of the week to make sense. Now it did. That was the trace the cover-up had missed. It was too small to be a day and too strange to be a clue, and it had been in her own notebook the whole time, waiting for the rest of the picture to arrive around it. She had 4 creatures that behaved like nothing in biology, that knew the building and the wreck, and that wanted, badly, to tell her something. The shape of the answer was right there, assembled, waiting for her to say it. She put the pen down instead. She had a rule about the difference between a thing you suspected and a thing you could prove, and she wasn't going to write the sentence until something that wasn't her own wishful arithmetic told her she was right. She didn't have to wait long. Chapter 17. Help. Megan sat back and waited to find a reason her theory was wrong, as she always did, and came up empty. That was when the mouse climbed onto the table. It came up a leg with alarming ease, crossed to the dictionary on its stand, the same dictionary, still open to the same weeks-old page she had just finished telling herself meant nothing, and did the thing she had decided mice didn't do. It turned the pages. It didn't nose at them or nest in them. It took a clump of paper in its mouth, hauled it across, let it fall, and did it again and again, working the great block of pages over in stages until it reached the one it wanted. Then it stood at the edge and dragged its claw along a single word. Slowly, underneath, the way you underline. This was not a warm flat surface and a sleeping rodent. She had just talked herself out of exactly this, twice as hard as the evidence deserved, and the mouse had waited for her to finish and then disproved her in front of her own eyes. She would describe it in the notebook with enough care that she couldn't explain it away later. The mouse sat back on its haunches and looked at her, as a mouse, possibly the same mouse, had at the corridor junction, and another had in this room on the first day before it shook its head and ran. Megan got up and came round the table. She didn't hurry. She looked at the underlined word. It was inspector. She stood very still, as you do when a thing you have been carefully not saying is said for you. She had assembled it, and stopped a word short, every time, because she wouldn't write down what she couldn't prove. The mouse had no such rule. It had simply reached up and underlined the conclusion she had refused to give herself. So that was what they were. She hadn't been told, and she hadn't quite let herself work it out. The mouse had met her in the gap between the two, and closed it. The mice were the inspectors. The mouse went back to work, hauling the pages over in the same laborious stages, shaking its head vigorously when Megan tried to help. Eventually it found the page it wanted and made the same dragging mark with its claw, 4 lines from the top. The word was, ironically, help. She stood still again. The first word had confirmed what they were. The second she could have written herself. 4 mice in a sealed building. There was only one thing they could be asking. They hadn't been steering her to be admired. They'd been steering her because there was no one else small enough to notice them, and clever enough to read what they left. The rest assembled itself fast now, the last pieces falling once the shape was right. Inspectors had come to a place that didn't want them. They'd been at work on the counter when Philip let himself in and blew the room apart, and the counter had been switched on, reaching, mid-measurement, when his bang tore it open. The shape wasn't Philip. Philip burned things. Philip did not make a man into a mouse. The counter had done that, or what the counter had woken in him had. A machine built to read what you are, down to the atom had read Philip to the end and set him off. She thought of the burnt photograph, the engines, the incidents. This was the same thing, bigger. The reading had given him his answer, and the answer came out of him as fire. It was the four standing too close who couldn't walk away from it. Dr. Light was inert. He could have stood in that room and the fire would have found nothing to catch. The inspectors were not inert. Almost nothing is. And when the machine came apart around them, it caught them on the way and did not put them back the same. She had the result. 4 inspectors had become 4 mice, and then the day had been removed, so that no one would ask why there were suddenly mice, or what they had been before, or why a lab was sealed, or where the inspectors had gone. There were no holes. They had never left. They had been for one Wednesday the most important creatures in the building, and Philip's bang had made them the smallest and easiest to ignore, and the cover-up had nailed it shut. They had been trying to tell her from the start. The head shake on the first day, the following, the leading, the wreck. And now 2 words. She had finally stopped being too scientific to read them. It should have felt like winning. This was the best piece of work she had ever done. She had taken a suspicion and turned it into a fact alone with a notebook, against whoever had removed a day to stop exactly this. But it sat wrong with her. Someone could edit the world. A day could be taken out of 40-odd heads. People could be changed into other shapes and trapped there. Someone had sent inspectors to Strings, and someone at Strings had responded by deleting the day. The proof of it was 4 trapped creatures and a broken machine that no one would explain, and that she wasn't supposed to know about. And the machine was the one that would have told her what she was. She noticed distantly that she had stopped waiting for it. Since California, the question had been, what am I? She had expected the answer to come from outside, from a machine, on the date in her notebook. There was no machine now. Her confirmation date meant nothing. There was only what she did next. That might tell her more about herself than the counter ever would. She didn't know whether that made things better or worse. The mouse was still watching her. "I understand," Megan said. "Not the science, the rest." The mouse didn't shake its head this time. She closed the dictionary gently, then opened it again. The words were evidence, and she wasn't going to be the person who lost evidence by tidying it. She wrote them down instead. She wrote down everything, and under it, last. Not the answer this time, but the second word the 4 trapped creatures had managed to find. Help. Then she stood up, put the notebook in her bag, and went to find Mr. Hong. She had solved it, and there was exactly one person in the building she wanted to watch while she said so.
Please subscribe. It tells YouTube that impossible murders and questionable science are worth encouraging. Continue straight to the next episode using the link on screen or in the description below. Want even more? The next book in the Noah Vale mysteries is Quantum Pizza. 16-year-old Noah Vale investigates a chef killed by lightning under a clear sky and discovers that Earth has been in witness protection for the past billion years. You'll find the book and more about the series at pglark.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.